Good morning, good afternoon. My name is Tom Goldtooth, the Executive Director of the Indigenous Environmental Network. I'm here in the Bay Area of California in the offices of Amazon Watch. We brought a delegation that's here to testify about their concerns about this proposed tropical forest standard that California is trying to pass. As epic wildfires in California have raged and killed, indigenous peoples and local communities from Africa, from Mexico, and to the Amazon are traveling to Sacramento, California tomorrow, Friday, November 15th, to demand that California cancel its plans to grab their lands and territories for the false solutions towards mitigating climate change called forest offsets. California's Air Resources Board is posed to adopt the so-called tropical forest standard that would allow polluters like Chevron or Shell oil refineries here in California to buy and trade carbon, the air, instead of reducing greenhouse gases and toxic emissions at source. Forest carbon offset projects consist of the privatization and commodification of air and the forests that can result in land grabs, evictions, and criminalization of forest-dependent communities. California wants to accept tropical forest carbon offsets into its cap-and-trade system. Such a plan creates a cheap pollution right to the corporations that pay these polluters to continue to pollute. The tropical forest standard has nothing to do with addressing climate change. California's cap and trade program has nothing to do with solving the climate crisis. These mechanisms are trade agreements, nothing more. These trade mechanisms privatize, commodify, and sell forest lands as carbon offsets in these fraudulent mechanisms such as RED, reducing emissions from deforestation and degradation. These offset schemes provide a financial laundering mechanism for developed countries and subnational states such as California to launder their carbon pollution on the backs of the global south. It creates a global scheme for the funding of fake forest conservation projects as a way of neutralizing California's greenhouse gas emissions. This is environmental injustice that does not cut emissions at source and continues releasing toxic emissions, creating health burdens on fence-line communities. The proposed tropical forest standard wants to use 1/3 of the world's tropical forests for offsets. Indigenous peoples and local communities, they live in these forests. These legally binding carbon market offset contracts are a form of climate disaster capitalism that can burden these communities with carbon accounting debts, duties, and responsibilities for 100 years or more. A broad international coalition of indigenous peoples, forest-dependent communities, environmentalists, people of color, and fence-line communities, we have come together to bring our voices to this Sacramento, and we're determined to stop the adoption of this proposed standard. California's tropical standard is bad for the environment, bad for the climate, bad for human rights, and bad for not recognizing the rights and territorial integrity of Mother Earth and Father Sky. The TFS for the tropical forest standard really stands for trading the future of the sky. If adopted, TFS will make global warming worse, which means more wildfires and deaths for California residents. The tropical forest standard, if approved, would outsource California's responsibility for human rights abuses and threats to the cultural survival of indigenous peoples that carbon offset pilot projects have already caused. be a sky protector. At this time, I'd like to introduce our representative from Amazon Watch. We're happy to be in their offices. At this time, we're going to have Zoe say a few words.
Thank you so much, Tom. We're really honored to be hosting this incredible delegation of leaders from around the world in Oakland. Today we're all struggling to breathe the air as smoke from the campfire and the Woolsey fire makes it difficult to breathe. And we know that our challenges in breathing is nothing compared to those people whose lives have been destroyed and to the 59 people who have lost their lives in the fire. So in this moment, we're very aware of the need to protect forests and the need to advance Indigenous rights. At Amazon Watch, that is our mission. And we also see this proposed California Tropical Forest Standard as a false solution that will not get us where we need to go with climate change, with forest protection, or with Indigenous rights. So as Tom said, the Tropical Forest Standard is a framework that would create a possible linkage between tropical forest jurisdictions and California that would allow for big polluters like Chevron to be paying money to countries or to states in the global south to protect their forests. But this is would be happening without the consultation and the consent of local communities, and has really fundamental problems in terms of how it would work, how it would actually take real steps to protect forests. We know that Indigenous peoples are the best guardians of the forest, but this does not mean that we have to turn their forests into markets, that we have to count these forests to protect them. So tomorrow we're going up to Sacramento. Hundreds of us are going to be gathering outside of the Air Resources Board, which is this regulatory agency that's considering the standard, and we're going to be standing up and standing together to urge the board to reject the Tropical Forest Standard and to stand with real solutions that look at underlying drivers of climate change. So one piece of our work at Amazon Watch, and one reason we're here, is because of oil drilling in the Amazon. Oil drilling has a truly devastating legacy in the rainforest and for communities across the Amazon, and particularly in the western Amazon. And this oil that's extracted, this bloody, terrible, destructive oil, is coming to California. California is the world's leading importer of oil from the Amazon. It's coming here, it's being refined, it's being used in our cars. And so to us, if we're going to address deforestation, if we're going to address climate change, we have to get to the roots, look at the root causes, which is oil drilling and oil extraction, and we have to move away from this and toward a more just world. So again, we're really honored to have these incredible leaders with us here today to speak to their community's resistance and to their rejection of the Tropical Forest Standard, and are honored to stand with them in this fight. Thank you.
Thank you, Zoe. As part of our Keeping in the Ground campaign, we formed this international alliance to bring our frontline communities together, from our pipeline resistors, our water protectors, but also now our air protectors, our sky protectors. We've linked these together. At this time, I'm proud to introduce Ana Ortega. She comes from Chiapas, Mexico.
Buenos días.
Good morning.
Muchas gracias, Tom.
Thank you very much, Tom.
Un honor estar aquí con
It is an honor
esta delegación
to be here
y
with this
ser
delegation
recibida en este territorio
and to be welcomed
Yurok y de los
to
otros
the
pueblos
Indigenous
que
Peoples
habitan
territory
esta región de los Estados Unidos.
ancestral territory it is.
Estamos aquí
In this part of the United States, we are here
estamos dando una batalla más en la sucesión de violaciones a nuestros territorios.
Against a new aggression and invasion of our territories.
Un trabajo
we
de
are
los pueblos
here in
indígenas
California
ha
because
sido desconocido históricamente.
There is an effort to erase the historic work and guardianship of indigenous peoples of the forests. And this tropical forest standard must be canceled. Tomorrow we will demand its cancellation in the hearing.
De bosques tropicales, este estándar que ha sido
this
construido,
so-called tropical forest standard
sin
has
consulta, sin la
been drafted without the consultation with indigenous peoples. Indigenous peoples have not granted our free and informed consent for this carbon market mechanism.
Abiertamente ilegal.
And therefore, these forest carbon offsets are completely illegal.
Pero se encima sobre la sucesión de violaciones
Furthermore,
que los pueblos indígenas,
these forest carbon offsets are based on the violation of the human rights of indigenous peoples and peasants and local communities who have always worked and lived in harmony with Mother Earth to tend to her well-being, to enrich her, and to love her. So the human rights of indigenous peoples and peasants have been violated and absolutely ignored in this process of drafting this standard.
Esta política de conservación es una política de
These
conservación que
policies
nació
of
de la
so-called
mano
conservation
de un despojo en los Estados
came
Unidos
out
y que se ha
of
impuesto en
a
todos
historic
lados del mundo, que se ha impuesto de un modo
invasion
colonial,
of
pero que está sentado
indigenous
sobre la
people's
base del
territories and massive
desconocimiento
land
de
grabs.
quienes habitan. La conservación de los Estados Unidos nació sobre la base del despojo
conservation
territorial
in
de
the
los
United
pueblos
States
indígenas.
and protected areas has always been based on such land grabs of indigenous people's territories, not just in the United States but throughout the world. And this kind of conservation without the people who actually have tended and conserved the coveted nature is a long history. We have been struggling against carbon markets and forest carbon offsets for over a decade. For 15 years, we have demonstrated systematically how forest carbon offsets and REDD Plus do not work. They do not reduce greenhouse gas emissions at all. Carbon offsets are just permissions to pollute for polluters. They're a cheap way out, and carbon offsets also are a way for investors to make money and to bounce back after the financial crisis. They're a money maker for polluting multinationals. And this all goes hand in hand with systematic and systemic human rights violations of indigenous peoples and peasants. These human rights abuses are inherent to the implementation of these carbon market mechanisms in our territories, be they in the rainforest or in the mountains. Carbon offsets restrict and prohibit communities from accessing their land and using the land. For example, in Mexico, Indigenous peoples' historic survival has always been linked to corn and cornfields and the crops of corn, forests, beans and squash, and which is actually comparable to forests in the wealth of agroecology and traditional knowledge that they require. And that's true not just for Mexico, but all of Mesoamerica. And so this forest and ecosystem offsets called Red Plus criminalizes Indigenous peoples and communities' lifestyles, and furthermore undermines their ability to feed themselves. Once a RED project is being implemented in our territories, Indigenous people's right to food is being violated because we can no longer feed ourselves. The traditional native doctors and midwives can no longer collect medicinal plants and sacred medicines because the Red Plus project or the Payment for Environmental Services project prohibits their access to these crucial medicines, to these sacred sites. In Mexico, we've seen again and again that in Chiapas, the Mayan people are being prohibited from accessing their land. Mayan people are no longer able to do their sacred journeys to sacred sites to celebrate ancestral ceremonies because of these Red Plus projects. And the life of the communities is endangered because when a woman is giving birth and the midwife can no longer offer her crucial herbs and sacred medicines, this woman who is trying to give birth to new life may die. And it's because these RED projects are not allowing the midwives and medicine people to practice their medicine and their gifts and collect the plants they need. Red Plus, in fact, is resulting in the militarization of conservation, in the militarization of protected areas, in the militarization of Indigenous people's territories and peasants' lands and fields. It's carbon offset projects in some cases actually look like a military invasion.
Tampoco pueden acceder a esas prácticas ancestrales.
And
Tienen que recibir un estipendio
our ancestral practices of our communities becomes outlawed by these projects, and we're given a pittance for the carbon offsets, and this is also resulting in people despairing and using these red monies for alcohol because they can no longer practice their culture. Furthermore, Red Plus violates the national sovereignty of Mexico as a country, as well as the sovereignty of our peoples. The peoples of Mexico were never consulted about these carbon offset projects, which are actually just the flip side of brutal extractivism. And of course, all of the peoples of Mexico needed to be consulted before these carbon offset mechanisms
son firmas
could be
que
implemented.
están sobre la base
And
de documentos y oficios
we
leoninos
see
que no dicen
that
nada, que están redactados en
there
inglés
are
y que la
government
gente no
officials,
conoce.
including governors of the states of Mexico, who are just rubber stamping
Aparece eventualmente
documents
de
that
la
are
mano
in
de un vínculo
English,
electrónico, una
obviously
supuesta
written in
consulta
California,
que, la que los
just
pueblos no
rubber
tienen
stamping
ningún acceso, ninguna
these land
posibilidad de
grabs,
responder a
and
eso, porque no
indigenous
hay
peoples and
ni los medios
communities
tecnológicos,
are
pero tampoco
completely
porque estén
excluded.
obligados
We
los
have
pueblos
no
a entrar a
way
esa lógica.
of
Los pueblos indígenas y las comunidades tienen
denying
leyes y formas
our
propias
consent to
de
these
ejercicio
projects.
de su soberanía y
And
su libre
obviously, these
Estas
impositions
formas
of
que son
carbon
asamblearias, que
markets
son
on our
colectivas,
lands and
y que son
territories
en el
also
ritmo y
violates
los tiempos
our
que los
indigenous
pueblos decidan.
peoples' traditional forms of
No fueron
governance and
hechas.
decision
Así es
making.
que se está
So,
violando un artículo principal de la Constitución mexicana, que
Red
es el
Plus
artículo primero,
also violates Article 1
porque
of the
viola,
Constitution
como he dicho,
of
los derechos
Mexico,
humanos fundamentales.
because Red Plus and carbon
alejar sin
offsets
posibilidad
violate
de comer
fundamental
a los
human
pueblos
rights and
indígenas que
freedoms,
están
including the right
considerados en este
to
contrato,
food,
sin
the
derecho
right
a la
to
salud y a sus
eat,
prácticas,
the right to health and health care
y
and
las violaciones
traditional health
asociadas a la
practices, as well
a las
as
restricciones
the
policíacas
right
para entrar en esos territorios, porque han sido
to peace,
desalojados
because we've
policíacamente
suffered violent
desde muchos años atrás.
evictions
Antes de que Red
at the
llegara,
hands
Red
of
se instaló
security
en un
forces,
de una
and
tremenda
even
violación sistemática
as
de
a
derechos humanos.
preparation for Red
luego,
violent evictions
Viola el
have
artículo
occurred.
2 de la Constitución,
Red
porque el
Plus and
artículo
California's forest offsets also violate
que
Article 2
incorporó
of the
el
Mexican
convenio
Constitution,
169 de la
which is
Organización
the
Internacional del
provision
Trabajo,
of the Mexican
que México firmó y
Constitution
los
that
Estados Unidos
included
no firmaron,
the rights enshrined in Convention 169 of the
que
International
reconoce
Labor
la libre
Organization.
determinación de los
And
pueblos.
lastly, of course, these California forest offset projects violate the fundamental right of indigenous peoples to
Y por si eso fuera
self-determination.
poco,
And
están
as if
firmando
that
un acuerdo
were not
con un
enough,
gobierno que
furthermore,
tiene en su haber, en su lista de agravios, tiene 37,000 desaparecidos.
in Mexico, there have been
Según
over
cifras
37,000 people
según
who
los Centros
have
de
been
Derechos
disappeared, who have been killed
Hay,
and disappeared without leaving a trace. These are
hay una
according,
guerra declarada al
according
pueblo
to
de
official
México sobre
statistics.
texto
And
del
so
narcotráfico.
California is signing carbon
Están
offset
firmando
contracts
con un
with the
Estado
Mexican
violador de los
government,
derechos humanos.
who is massively violating the rights of the peoples of Mexico.
todo este permiso, todo el permiso que le han dado a Red para operar
So,
en el estado con
Giving a
en
green light
México,
to Red Plus
es
in
un
Mexico
permiso para mantener
is a green
todos
light
los proyectos extractivos de extracción petrolera, de
greenwash
incremento del agronegocio,
and increase
de desarrollo de
extractivism
infraestructura
and
donde están asociadas los
agrobusiness
mercados de carbón.
and
Cada uno de estos negocios
the
extractivos
carbon
están asociados a esta
offset
agenda.
projects
Es decir,
and the
es
carbon market
una
itself
licencia para
is
mantener
just
la
a
crisis climática
way
y la
of
devastación
making
y la
climate
contaminación
change and
de
climate
los
disasters worse,
Por eso estamos
and
aquí.
the historic land grab of our territories. That is why we are here today.
Gracias.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ana. Gracias. Our next speaker comes from Ecuador, Quechua of the Seriaku, Marlon Santi.
Buenos días, estoy aquí
Good morning.
en la bahía de
I
California.
am here in the Bay Area of California.
Soy el representante de la Coordinadora Nacional del
I
Movimiento
am
Pollute.
representative of the national coordinator of the Pachakutik movement of Ecuador,
defensor de los derechos de la naturaleza, de la madre
a
tierra y de los
defender of the
derechos del
rights
hombre.
of nature, of Mother Earth, and of human rights
Es
as well.
preocupante para los pueblos indígenas
Indigenous peoples are profoundly
que
concerned
el mundo, el clima,
that
esté
the climate
cambiando
of the world
y que la vida de la humanidad
is changing,
esté en
and
un
that
declive
the very existence
fuerte,
of humanity is at
y que ahí
risk,
los gobernantes
and that
tengan que
the
utilizar el
governors
cambio
and
climático
politicians
para apoderarse
are
de
using
tierras y
climate
territorios indígenas
change
sin respetar el
to
derecho
grab indigenous
pueblos
peoples'
o
territories
derecho de la humanidad.
without our consent and without the permission of
Nosotros
humanity
No
itself.
somos el culpable, no
We,
somos los responsables
indigenous peoples,
de que
are
el planeta
not
está
to blame.
en una crisis
We
climática.
are not responsible
Los responsables
for
son
this
las
climate
empresas,
crisis.
tanto petroleras,
Who's
mineras,
responsible
las
for
corporaciones
climate change
que
is
han dañado
the
grandes
huge
espacios
destructive industries
de la madre tierra.
who have wounded vast parts of
Pretenden
Mother Earth.
firmar
So now
un código que viola
the state of
derechos
California
humanos,
is
derechos de los pueblos
posed to
indígenas
adopt
en América Latina y
the
en
Tropical
todas
Forest
partes del mundo.
Standard, which would violate the human rights of
Los
indigenous
gobernantes
peoples and all of
Están
humanity in all of the
emitiendo
world.
genocidio humanitario,
This is
entrando
a
como un negocio
genocide,
hipócrita,
not just of indigenous peoples, but a genocide against all of
y
humanity.
siguen
And it is veiled
emitiendo
in hypocrisy.
dióxido de carbono al medio
And
ambiente
it
sin la
is a
responsabilidad
farce
de bajar
to just
y están dando
pollute
a
more,
los
to
países del
emit
sur
more
o a los
carbon
territorios indígenas
dioxide. And
recursos para que
this
sigamos cuidando. Los
sham
pueblos indígenas
wants to use
o las
indigenous
nacionalidades
peoples' lands and territories
hemos
as
aportado a la
carbon
humanidad
dumps
cuidando los bosques,
for
cuidando la
the
naturaleza,
pollution of
y es
the
un deber de
north.
nosotros seguir
And
cuidando.
indigenous peoples
Pero
are the
eso no es
ones
negocio.
who have
Eso, que
protected
sepan
these
los
lands
gobernantes que no
and
es negocio.
forests.
Es nuestra
And
forma de
nature
vida,
is
es
not
nuestra
for
forma de ver
sale. Indigenous
naturaleza,
peoples' territories
bosques,
and
a las
lives are
lagunas, a
not
los
for
ríos,
sale.
al aire,
Our
al espacio,
responsibility
nuestra forma
as
de ver
peoples is to take
y no
care of the forests
Estamos
and the
aquí
water and the air that we
tres
breathe and the
continentes
sky. We are
porque
here
estamos
from
preocupados
3 continents
No
because
podemos
we are
aceptar
profoundly
que
concerned
las empresas
about what
y las
is happening.
corporaciones
We
grandes
absolutely
no tengan ni la
cannot
mínima responsabilidad
accept that the governments
de
and
correspondencia
industries
en bajar
do not
emisiones de carbono
assume,
y
take
que
on their
pretendan
responsibility
meter
to reduce
en un
greenhouse gas
negocio
emissions at source,
hipócrita
but on the contrary want to
para
turn
salvarse
these
ellos
false
y
solutions
no
to climate
ser
change into a money-making
ante la humanidad
venture.
por los responsables del cambio climático.
And they are shirking their responsibility to
Es el
humanity
de
to
unirnos, la
address
sociedad
climate
civil,
change. So
la humanidad,
civil society
decir,
and humanity
no
and
estamos
indigenous peoples must
vendiendo el
unite
cielo,
to say
las
no
tierras,
to the sky
los bosques de
sellers.
los pueblos
The
indígenas no es
lands
negocio.
and
No
rainforests
puede
of
ser
indigenous
posible
peoples
que
are
empresas
not for
petroleras
sale.
como Chevron, que
It
está
is
en
not
Richmond, aquí en California,
possible that
traiga
Chevron, which has
petróleo
its
de otros
refinery in
continentes, de la
Richmond,
Amazonía,
that brings crude from the
y que aquí,
Amazon and other
en
parts of the
California,
world, and
nosotros o la sociedad tenga que salir con máscara
the
para
pollution
poder
and
respirar bien.
wildfires are so bad
el
that
cielo
we
de
have
California está
to
contaminado. Y
use
esto
masks
no vamos
because the sky
nosotros
and air here in
a
California
decir
is
que nuestros
so
bosques están para que ellos sigan
polluted.
contaminando.
So our Amazon
responsabilidad
is
directa
not going to be used
estamos aquí
so these
para el día
criminal
de mañana
polluters can pollute more.
decir a los gobernantes
So we are
que
here
nuestro
to
bosque no
tell
esté en
the
negocio, que nuestro
politicians
territorio no esté en negocio.
that our
Está en la
territory is
responsabilidad de
not
ellos
for sale, our
en
lives
salvar el
are not for
planeta.
sale,
Ahora,
and that they
tienen
have
la
a responsibility to
de
save the
comprometerse en
planet
salvar el
and
planeta,
must
o
commit
ellos son
to
los
actually
responsables directos
save the
para llevar a
planet,
ellos a la-
or
a la
they are
justicia
going to
climática
be
por los daños graves
judged
ambientales, sociales,
in
culturales
international
y
courts
violación de derechos humanos que han
for
cometido en el planeta.
killing the
Gracias.
planet and violating all of our rights. Thank you very much.
Going into another region of the Amazon is Chief Ninawa, and he's come here a long ways to talk to these people in the north in California. Chief Ninawa.
Muito bom dia a todos.
Good morning,
Todas.
everyone.
Meu nome é Ninawa.
My name is
Sou
Ninawa.
presidente da Federação do Povo
I'm the
Hunipui do
president
Estado
of the
do Acre.
Hunipui Federation of the state of
E
Acre,
estou
Brazil.
aqui nesse momento
And I'm
em
here
Califórnia
today in California
para compartilhar com todos os
to
meus amigos de
share
outros
with
continentes
all of my friends from all over the world, from different
Ah.
continents,
a verdade, o que representa
to share a
esse
truth
grande debate sobre
with them and with
mudanças
you,
climáticas hoje na região amazônica,
fundamental truth about the
principalmente na
climate
região
change
amazônica do Brasil.
issue. And I'm
Aonde se
speaking
tem como vitrine
about
do mundo inteiro o
what
estado
is
do Acre,
happening in the Brazilian
exemplo
Amazon.
que se
We're
divulga
seeing
sobre
that
a
Red
implementação
Plus,
do programa
these
de rede
forest
dentro
offsets,
das florestas
is
na região
being
amazônica.
implemented by
E esse
California
projeto está se
in
ampliando,
our
se
Amazon
ampliou em toda a
in
região
Brazil.
amazônica
And we're
brasileira.
seeing that Red Plus is being implemented
Uma intenção
throughout the
que os
Amazon.
governos propagam, fazem
And
propaganda,
The
dizendo que vão
governments
reduzir as emissões de
say
gases
that
poluentes.
they are going to
na-
reduce greenhouse gas
no efeito
emissions and
E
the greenhouse
isso para nós
gas,
é uma mentira, uma
the
falsa
greenhouse
solução
effect.
que é apresentada
But
pelo governo do estado
Red
de Califórnia,
Plus and
governo
carbon
do Acre,
offsets
e
are
demais
false
governadores que estão
solutions to
apresentando esse
climate
projeto.
change.
O projeto de rede ele representa
Red
também,
Plus
além dessa tentativa falsa,
is a false
o projeto de
solution
rede
to climate
ele viola os
change.
direitos,
It violates
viola
human
os
rights
direitos internacionais,
and it
viola os direitos dos
violates
povos indígenas, viola os
the
direitos
rights
humanos.
enshrined in international
exemplo,
human
no
rights
Acre,
instruments and
Há
also
uma
indigenous
grande falta
peoples'
de
rights.
transparência
For
dos
example, in
governantes, dos
Acre,
implementadores de
there's a
rede,
complete lack of
de não aplicar a
transparency
Convenção
in the
69.
implementation of Red Plus
Viola diretamente
projects.
a Convenção
They are
69.
not implementing
Não se
Convention
consulta
169
os
that
territórios
enshrines
indígenas para
indigenous
implementar esse
peoples'
programa
rights.
dentro dos territórios
They are
indígenas.
violating our
E
rights.
se aplica consulta
because they wanna
pública
grab
por
our
meio de
territories.
ONGs, por meio
And
de institutos
there
governamentais
are
para dizer que é uma
NGOs
consulta.
and
Isso não é
government
uma consulta
agencies that are
livre para
organizing
informar aos povos indígenas para se
so-called
aplicar o projeto de
consultations that are really just window dressing.
Neste momento,
Right now,
agora, no dia de amanhã, na
we
cidade
are
de
preparing
Sacramento,
to travel to Sacramento,
está sendo
where
colocado
tomorrow
em aprovação
there will be
a
a
norma
hearing
das florestas tropicais.
to
E essa norma,
adopt
ela
the
representa para
tropical
nós
forest standard. And this
uma
tropical
concretização
forest
de
standard
privatização dos
is
territórios,
nothing more
das
than
áreas
the
de preservação que são
privatization of
hoje,
indigenous peoples' territories.
apreciada pelos governos para se implementar o
Our
projeto de
territories are coveted by governments for
normas,
these forest offset projects.
E os governos
The
eles estão
governments
dizendo que não é
are
lei,
saying
é só uma
that,
norma que não
oh,
vai-
why are you so
não vai causar
upset?
tanta
It's
preocupação
only
para a
a
sociedade.
standard, it's not a
mas no
law.
meu entendimento,
But my understanding
Norma é uma lei,
is
sim.
that this tropical
A prova
forest
que há uma lei
standard
que vai ser aprovado no
sets the
Congresso
stage
de Califórnia.
for adopting a law in the
Nós somos contra
California
a esse mecanismo,
legislature.
a esse projeto, a essa
And
norma.
we
Nós viemos aqui
reject
de
the
várias
tropical
partes do
forest
mundo
standard. We
para
are
dizer
here
ao
from
Congresso
all
de
parts of
Califórnia
the world to
que não aprova
tell
esse projeto.
the
Não
Californian
aprova essa normativa.
politicians
pode
that
trazer
they
maiores
must
consequências
reject this tropical
futuramente
forest standard
para os povos indígenas.
because the very future of indigenous people is at stake.
No Brasil,
In
hoje,
Brazil,
a CONARED
right
discute
now,
a
with the
salvaguarda
Red
para os
Plus
territórios indígenas,
projects,
para as áreas de,
they are
de conservação
saying that
ambiental.
these projects include
Mas em momento nenhum essa
safeguards and
salvaguarda que são
they're
discutidas
for
é uma garantia
conservation. But
para
safeguards
guardar
are
a vida das
not
nossas futuras
human
gerações.
rights guarantees.
Porque tá bem
These
claro na
so-called
normativa
safeguards do not
7 de
protect
setembro
the
dos
survival of
governadores,
indigenous peoples.
Que no artigo 12
in Article 12 of
Está
the Tropical
dizendo
Forest
que
Standard,
essa normativa ela
it
obriga esses governos que
stipulates
implementam
that
o
this
projeto de RED
standard allows these
a fazer
governments
uma
to
fiscalização muito
implement
radical,
RED Plus and to radically change
fiscalizando as
the
pessoas que
legal
entram nesse
framework.
território,
And
mesmo elas que
it
já estão morando lá
just
dentro,
privatizes our
esse território que
territories
está
and
reservado para a implementação do
dehumanizes
projeto de
us.
vai ser como uma entrada ilegal nesse território.
And this is a completely illegal maneuver.
Esse tipo de norma criminaliza,
This
tenta criminalizar as
California's
comunidades
Tropical Forest
indígenas,
Standard
comunidades
criminalizes indigenous
como se fossem nós os
communities
culpados
and peoples as
de
it
causar o
and
equilíbrio.
it blames indigenous peoples for
A
global
prova
warming
de que
and the
não
lack
somos
of
nós, os povos
balance
indígenas,
of
comunidades tradicionais,
the climate.
é que até hoje nós lutamos e
So
preservamos.
that's why we
diferente
are
das
here to
empresas
remind the world
que são
that
essas
indigenous
mesmas empresas
peoples
que
and
estão
First
pagando por esse
Nations
projeto de
are
RED
the ones who have always
Califórnia,
protected
em toda
nature
parte
and
do
the
mundo,
forests,
que
whether
estão
it's here in
poluindo. Não
California
são as
or anywhere
comunidades.
else in the world. And we are not the ones who are polluting.
Não são os povos indígenas.
Indigenous peoples aren't the polluters.
Nós queremos dizer para você que está
So
nos
we
assistindo
want
neste
to
momento,
tell each and every one of you that are
se
listening
você
to
não,
us today
ainda não conhece
that
essa
if you don't
falsa solução,
already know and understand about this false
procure
solution to
ouvir as
climate
comunidades.
change, please
na minha aldeia,
listen
ninguém nunca foi fazer uma consulta.
and tell
Ninguém
your
nunca foi
communities and your
explicar o que esse
families
projeto representa.
that
Ninguém nunca foi explicar quem é que paga por
I
isso.
and my community were never
Quem é o
consulted about
beneficiário,
these
verdadeiro
carbon offset
beneficiário desse
projects.
projeto. Ninguém nunca foi,
Nobody ever went
o governo nunca foi prestar conta na nossa comunidade
to my community.
dos recursos que são gastos.
California
Em nome desse
never
projeto
sent
de RED.
anybody
São
to
milhões e
talk
milhões
with
de
us.
recursos
But there's millions
são
and
que
millions
fazem
of
empréstimo,
dollars
são
that are on the
recebidos
table.
do governo da Alemanha, da
And
China, da
the
Noruega,
Chinese
de
government, the
Califórnia.
German government, the Californian
Há uma
government,
falta de transparência.
all are
da execução desse recurso.
making deals.
E não estou
They're
falando
wheeling and
aqui
dealing
por conta de
millions
dinheiro.
of dollars.
Mas estou falando aqui porque
But
na
I'm not
tradição
here
do meu
because
povo,
I care about this
A
money.
nossa
I'm
floresta é
here
sagrada
to
para nós.
defend the
Para a nossa
survival of my
espiritualidade,
people
para as nossas
and
medicinas
the
tradicionais.
Amazon and our spirituality
para manter a nossa tradição
and
viva.
to defend
É nesse sentido
our
dizer que
culture and make sure our traditions are alive
os nossos
and
territórios são sagrados para
flourishing
nós.
because our territories are sacred.
E eles não podem ser comercializados, visto como
They
comércio
cannot be
por
bought
aí
and
mundo afora,
sold and
colocando preço
privatized.
no ar, na água,
and
nas terras,
financialized,
nas árvores, até em nós
The
mesmos.
water, the trees, the
Nós somos
birds
pessoas,
are not
seres
for
humanos,
sale. We
temos direito
are
garantido
human
nos direitos
beings and
humanos
we are not for sale.
internacional.
And we have
Somos pessoas
human
garantidas
rights.
como seres humanos
We
de viver
must be
dignamente, sendo
respected
respeitados
as
os
human
nossos direitos
rights.
tradicionais e sagrados do
And
nosso
we must be
território.
respected as human beings.
A mãe natureza não pode ser vista como comércio. Tem que ser respeitada.
Mother
os direitos,
Earth is not a business
não
deal.
comercializado.
She must not be bought and sold.
Obrigado e dizer que
Thank
nós
you.
somos contra esse
So,
mecanismo falso de
We
projeto de RED.
stand against this
Não vai reduzir
false
nada.
solution
Nós
that's called
não
Red
estamos de acordo
Plus,
com a aprovação
and we
dessas normas
oppose
tropicais, porque
the
isso é
adoption of California's
a
Tropical
prova
Forest
de
Standard
privatizar os territórios.
because it is nothing more than privatizing our territories and taking them away from us.
E os congressistas
And the politicians
que vão aprovar essa lei,
that are
Você pode fazer a
opposed
sua
to
escolha agora.
adopt this standard
de
and
você
laws,
ser um herói no futuro para as crianças, para os seus filhos,
you have a choice.
Não
You can
aprovando essa
be
normativa.
your children's hero. You
Porque
can
você
be
aprovando
heroes
essa
for
normativa,
humanities
você tá
and
dando uma
reject
carta branca
this tropical
para as
forest
empresas
standard.
continuarem poluindo.
Or you can just be the
E
lapdogs
privatizar a vida de
of
muitas
polluting
comunidades tradicionais dos povos
industries
indígenas.
and
Ou você também
on
pode escolher ser um
be
criminoso,
complicit
aprovando essa
in the
normativa.
disappearance and extinction of
A
indigenous
escolha-
peoples and local
Eu
communities.
deixo com você. Muito
So
obrigado.
it's your decision.
E que o grande espírito
Thank you. Make
Pak Shippa
the great creator, Pak Shippa,
possa continuar nos dando força a cada um dos irmãos que
bless
estão aqui.
each and every one of the brothers and sisters
Dos
here
nossos sagrados.
so that their hearts are strong to continue to
clarear a mente
struggle
desses
and to
governadores,
defend the
dessas
sacred
empresas,
and to defend the
das
sky
fundações que apoiam,
and to
só querem pensar no
oppose
dinheiro.
the polluters
Não nas vidas
and
que
the
dependem
governments that
dos recursos
just
naturais
want to
do
make money with
House,
nature.
house.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker comes from Nigeria, from Cross River. And for those that have been keeping track of what California has been doing with this California Red and these provisions of carbon offsets within its air legislation, you will remember that Nigeria is one of those pilot projects of California Red that was designated years ago, with California trying to implement these forest carbon offsets there. So our next speaker has come a long ways. Asume is here to speak.
Thank you, Tom. My name is Asume Osoka, and I'm the director of the organization Social Action from Nigeria. It's interesting to be here in California. You know, you walk along the streets and you see people wearing masks here, and it is obvious because of the wildfires that have devastated this state. Many communities have been burned down, a lot of people have been killed, and the reality that we're dealing with here is that of climate change. I come from Nigeria, where we've experienced massive floodings, unprecedented flooding this year and also in 2012. Communities, areas that had never ever experienced flooding in history, recorded history, experienced massive flooding in different parts of the country. In Nigeria, in the north of the country, the Sahel region, there is desertification because of climate change, and this has created a lot of situations of conflict between herders and farmers. The Lake Chad Basin, which used to be the lifeline for millions of people, in Nigeria, in Chad, in Cameroon, have almost completely dried out because of climate change. And so, the point that we need to make is that climate change is real. Whether it's in California, whether it's in the United States, where there have been very serious adverse weather conditions, or whether it's in Africa, climate change is real globally and it's devastating the lives of people all over the world. And that is why it is important that people and governments in particular take concrete and real actions to address the causes of climate change, which is the emission of greenhouse gases, which causes global warming. We all know that the main source of greenhouse gases is from fossil fuels, which is the burning of crude oil and natural gas. And I come from Nigeria, and we work with communities that are affected by the exploitation of crude oil. And the reality that we deal with is that of devastation, the pollution, water pollution, air pollution, the loss of livelihoods, the abuses of the rights of people, the destruction of the livelihoods of people in the process of producing oil, which is exported to countries like the United States, to Europe, to feed the lifestyles that we have here. And the story of oil exploitation in Nigeria is the story of colonization, the story of colonialism. A situation where the resources of people in a particular territory is taken to satisfy the needs of people, corporations elsewhere. And what we're seeing in the case of the Tropical Forest Standard is that California, the state of California, is attempting, whether wittingly or unwittingly, to reintroduce colonialism in an attempt to address the real problem of climate change. A situation where, rather than take concrete actions to offset, to reduce emissions in California, that forests in other parts of the world in the developing world in particular will be cordoned off and for offsetting the emissions in California is colonialism. The idea that Africa, the idea that the Latin America exists only to satisfy the needs of corporate interests in the United States, in California in particular, is colonialism, and that has to be pointed out. I don't know if the politicians and the bureaucrats that are drafting this policy understand the implications of what they are doing. I want to believe that they don't, and that they need to be educated about the negative impact, the devastation that this is causing. Tom made reference to Cross River, and this is Cross River is not just a forest. Cross River is a place that is inhabited by people that call the place home, people that have lived there for generations. And these people depend on the forest for their livelihoods. They go into the forest to collect vegetables, afang leaves, and other leaves which are part of the staple in that part of the world. People collect snails, and so the protein needs of people is met by their interaction with the forest. But what we're seeing is a situation where, because of these new forest carbon schemes, RED, and now we're going to have the California Tropical Forest Standard, which is linked to RED, people are being chased away from their livelihood. People are being chased away from their forests. People are being, people that just go into the woods to live the life that they are used to are arrested. They are criminalized. And the reality is that of forced migration. Today in the United States, there's a debate over the caravan from Latin America. In the Sahel, people are crossing, through the Mediterranean to try to go into Europe. But not many people realize that there are drivers for this kind of migration. And forest carbon offset projects exacerbate those kinds of influences that force people to move away because they don't have any other choice. How will people survive when you take their land away, when you take their forests away in the name of offsetting emissions in places like California? And it will have maybe been excusable if these schemes work, if these schemes are efficient in reducing emissions. But what we have seen is that these are fraudulent schemes that do not serve any purpose other than allowing corporations to continue to pollute while claiming that because they have bought some carbon credits elsewhere, they have done. The reality is that, with particular reference to Cross River State in Nigeria, the schemes will not in any way contribute to the reduction of emissions. Because what we have seen so far is that despite the attempt by the government of Cross River, despite the attempt to create the forest police abusing the rights of people, the reality is that logging is continuing in that area. Because what has happened is that the cordoning off of forest for RED schemes has driven up the price of wood. And when the price of wood rises, it means that there is an incentive for more logging because you have increased the stakes. It is more profitable to engage in logging because RED has made wood more expensive. And with very corrupt security officials, even those that are forest guards or part of the forest police are involved in deals and schemes with loggers to continue to log. So this is not working. This is not working. We have a government in Cross River State that is very corrupt in Nigeria. This is a government that is the biggest threat to the preservation of forests in Cross River State. This government of Cross River State, which is going to enter into a deal or a partnership or a contract with the state of California, is the biggest threat. They are today planning to construct what they call a superhighway. A superhighway that has been shown by everybody to be completely useless or not needed by anyone. But because of the interest of the governor of the state to get some kickbacks from construction companies, and they are they're insisting on constructing a highway, a super highway, through the same forest that they advertise that they want to preserve to make money through rent schemes such as this. It is not working. It is a whole scam. And we have looked beyond the forest offset schemes. We have also looked at the Clean Development Mechanism, the CDM, to see that globally the attempt to offset emissions in one part of the world by buying credits from elsewhere doesn't work. We have looked at projects that claim project by Chevron, project by Shell, that claim to reduce the gas flaring that have been carried out for decades, to be very fraudulent. These are projects that will not reduce any flaring, but by packaging the paperwork, they can present reasonable claims by working on data and just cooking up figures. They can present claims. And what we are seeing with the tropical forest standard is that what California, if this tropical forest standard is accepted, is instrumentalized, is that all the bureaucrats will be looking for is paperwork. Whatever safeguards they are talking about, whatever they talk about is about paperwork. Once entities, the jurisdictions globally can present the right paperwork, that is all that is done. Nobody is concerned about the real reduction of emissions, which is needed to address the very serious, the very real and very concrete problems of climate change, which we must all together, as peoples, as governments, work together to address.
Thank you very much. So people are asking, what can we do? If you're in the listening area of the Bay Area, if you're in Sacramento, if you're in this area of California, we're asking that you come out to Sacramento. Come out to 1001 I Street. That's the offices and where this public hearing is going to be held on this proposed tropical forest standard. It's the offices of the California Air Resources Board, called CARB. If you are not able to be there, if you're from outside of the listening area, tag Air Resources. Tag Air Resources and express what your concerns are. We need help. The corporations are behind us. I call that the matrix. The matrix is behind us. The large NGOs and non-governmental organizations are behind us. The financial institutions, the World Bank is behind this scam. And it's part of a larger process of the capitalization, the colonization, part of capitalization of nature, the financialization of nature. And this is where you can help out, start to learn more about what's going on. And our people here are very, very brave people, because we're already hearing a lot of the pressures that our indigenous peoples have when they speak out on the truth of this issue. There's a lot of harassment, intimidation that goes on as they go home. There's big money here. Some of the projections years ago, as I started to get involved with this, is that it has the potential to be $1 trillion market system. The financialization of nature. With air, we know it's happening with water. Even the pipeline corridor, I understand from the Trans-Canada pipeline, they're already exploring along that corridor of making that a carbon offset. Imagine that. Climate-friendly grasses, and they're sequestering the carbon in the soil along the pipeline corridor, and they're going to write it off as an offset, making additional money. Enbridge, all these pipelines, they're part of the problem. So this carbon offset, carbon pricing, these schemes, it's continuing with the business as usual. That's why we're here, to organize. keep oil in the ground, stop these fossil fuel subsidies. It's very important. The future of this planet, the future of our people is at stake. And also, continue to follow up with us on social media, Indigenous Environmental Network, Indigenous Rights and Media, our Facebook page, Amazon Watch, California Environmental Justice Alliance, Center for Biological Diversity, Rainforest Action Network, and many others are part of this initiative. Friends of the Earth, US, many others. We're building this awareness that we need to do something about this. Hashtags. In this world, hashtags. Offsets pollute. Hashtag offsets pollute. Hashtag no TFS. Hashtag sky protector. Hashtag Indigenous Rising. So we've been doing our homework. This is the final environmental analysis of the state of California Air Resources Board. Close to 180 pages. But many of you, we've seen this before. We've seen these environmental analysis on these proposed pipelines. We've seen this all along on the expansion of the fossil fuel industry. For those of you working on toxic pollution facilities, we're familiar with these environmental analysis. And they're usually inadequate. They're not addressing all the questions and the concerns that our people have, indigenous and non-indigenous. So you heard the concerns and the comments of our relatives that have come here from a long ways. Hopefully they're going to be heard and not cut off at this California Air Resources Board meeting. They're going to try to cap us off to 2-minute presentations. But as you know, they need translation. So we need to get the support of the people in California to make those calls, to send that message, to allow our relatives enough time to tell their story. And these are the responses that the California Air Resources Board made to all the comments that were submitted on this proposed tropical forest standard. There are a lot of comments of those groups who are pro, they support this, including the state of in Nigeria, the country of Nigeria, I believe, the state of Cross River, and even the governor from where our brother from the Seriaku, he was here in September at the Global Climate Action Summit. He was here when we demonstrated and we expressed our concerns at the governor's climate and forest task force. They have these various structures they've created. So we're here. So this is, you can get these documents, go online, California Air Resources Board. So this concludes our presentation to you. We thank you very much. Thank you.